Welcome back, everybody. We're diving deep today into a topic that seems to spark a lot of debate.
Chivalry.
It really does. We've got a really interesting mix of sources for this one. We've got everything from those historical articles to modern etiquette guides.
Oh, yeah.
And even we've got some of those fiery online discussions from Reddit.
Absolutely.
So it seems like chivalry is not just a thing of the past, but it's still very much a hot topic, even in the 21st century.
It really is. And it's interesting. The debate often boils down to this fundamental question. Is it about reinforcing outdated gender roles, or is it just basic human decency?
Yeah.
And our sources really offer a wide spectrum of opinions on this, which is part of what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
I agree. By the end of this, you're going to understand how chivalry evolved over time, what it means today, and how it might even show up in your own life.
Absolutely.
So to kick things off, let's start with that classic knight in shining armor image we often associate with chivalry. The Cambridge Dictionary defines it as polite, honest, and kind behavior, especially by men towards women.
But even in its traditional form, it was more nuanced than simply rescuing damsels in distress. Think of it more as a code of conduct for knights, almost like an international law of war, as historian Maurice Keene puts it. Less about romance and more about regulating behavior within, the knightly class.
That's a really good point. It actually reminds me of that anecdote from the Carol magazine article,
Oh, yeah.
where the author's worried her son isn't being chivalrous because he rushes ahead of his daughter to get on the school bus.
Right, right.
And it kind of highlights that common assumption that a lot of us have, that chivalry equals men treating women in a certain way, like holding doors, offering seats.
Exactly. But as we'll see, that's just, scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Some of our sources argue that this traditional view of chivalry is inherently rooted in sexism and outdated gender roles. One source puts it pretty bluntly, saying it implies doing those things should be rewarded with some great honor, which perpetuates the idea that women are weaker and need special treatment.
That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah.
So to really understand this debate, I think we need to look back at how it actually evolved over time. The History.com article gives us a great overview of the origins of chivalry back in the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
And it emphasizes that it was initially a code of conduct for knights, specifically during warfare. It wasn't primarily about courtly love.
No, this historical context is crucial. Imagine it as a set of rules governing warfare and protecting that knightly class, like a way to regulate behavior within a specific social hierarchy. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that chivalry became romanticized and linked to that, gentlemanly behavior.
Ah, so that's where that image of the dapper gentleman with impeccable manners comes from.
Exactly.
But it also raises the question, are we romanticizing a system that inherently benefited men at the expense of women?
That is the crux of the debate. The History.com article actually mentions Edmund Burke, who was lamenting the death of chivalry during the French Revolution.
Interesting.
He viewed it as the loss of a noble ideal, but we have to ask ourselves, are we mourning the loss of a system that, reinforced inequality?
It's a really thought-provoking question. It makes me wonder, maybe what we're really yearning for isn't so much chivalry itself, but rather just basic human decency, respect, regardless of gender.
That leads us to another really important distinction: chivalry versus common courtesy. Etiquette expert Letitia Baldridge, in her book New Complete Guide to Executive Manners, argues that chivalry isn't actually dead. It's just evolved into civility, kindness that's extended to everyone.
I love that idea. It's not dead, it's just not gender-based.
Right.
So it's about those actions that we can all do, like holding doors, offering seats, or just simply keeping our word.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether it's for a man or a woman.
Precisely. And she gives these concrete examples that make it relatable. But it raises the question, is this simply good manners, or is there something more? What's the intention behind the act?
Right.
Is it different?
That's where things get really interesting. It's where those Reddit discussions that we haven't, get particularly heated.
Oh, yeah.
We dove into both run popular opinion and dating. And man, there's just a whole spectrum of opinions on what chivalry actually means in today's world.
There really is. In the Run Popular Opinion thread, one user, ShrekJohnson27, argues that men are putting in the effort to be chivalrous,
Okay.
but that women have unrealistic expectations.
Oh, interesting.
So it kind of highlights that tension we see in modern dating, where what one person considers chivalrous, the other person is like, well, that's not really what I'm looking for.
Right. And on the flip side, we have that dating thread with users like Mind Eye Retreater who see any form of traditional chivalry as inherently tied to the patriarchy and male dominance.
Right.
They're arguing that it's about men asserting their power and putting women in a subservient position.
Yeah, and you see the emotional charge of this debate in some of the comments.
Yeah.
One user, Flower and Eggs, says they'd never be with a selfless man,
Wow.
suggesting they view chivalry as some form of manipulation in the dating world.
It's almost as if the word itself has become loaded with all these different meanings
It really has.
and interpretations, which makes it hard to even have a productive conversation.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a fascinating shift. It's highlighted in the Berkeley Beacon article. Women are now adopting traditionally chivalrous behaviors.
Right. They're opening doors, paying for dates,
Yeah.
taking on roles that were once considered male territory.
The article explores a few possible reasons for this shift. Changes in dating dynamics, women's increased financial independence, and the desire for more, egalitarian relationships.
So maybe what we're seeing is a move away from those rigid gender roles
Could be.
toward a more fluid and equitable approach.
Perhaps, but it also raises a lot of new questions.
It does. Does this signal progress toward equality, or does it create, new complexities?
Exactly. And that leads us to a really crucial takeaway, particularly from the Berkeley International article.
Okay.
They argue that checklist chivalry, those surface-level actions like, opening doors, paying bills, that's not the core of the concept. What really matters, they say, are qualities of character,
Right.
like genuine respect, compassion, and trustworthiness.
I agree.
Those are the true hallmarks of chivalry, regardless of gender.
That's a really important point. And so, as you're listening to this, ask yourself, what actions really demonstrate those qualities in your own life and in your own relationships?
It's a question we're pondering, and it brings us to the heart of the matter. What does it actually mean to be truly chivalrous in a world where those traditional roles are constantly evolving?
It's a great question.
And it's a question that a lot of people are grappling with, The Is Chivalry Dead? Article on the Outlook brings up a relevant point. Men today often feel unsure about what's actually expected of them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They fear being perceived as sexist or patronizing for doing things that, maybe once were considered chivalrous.
Right. It seems like navigating these evolving social norms can be really tricky.
It is.
Maybe that's why just having open communication about these expectations and preferences is so important, especially in modern relationships.
It really is, yeah.
We can't just assume that everyone shares the same understanding of what chivalry means.
Right, and this kind of lack of clarity can sometimes lead to, those awkward misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And it's actually highlighted by a comment from Cagsel in the Why Answers article. They say that some females who have ego of man see chivalry as a sign of weakness in man.
Oh, interesting. So it's not as simple as men being chivalrous and women appreciating it. It seems like some women might interpret those chivalrous acts as implying they're incapable or in need of special treatment.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity. While some might appreciate those gestures, others could see them as condescending or even, a way of reinforcing traditional gender roles.
It's fascinating. And it's interesting that in that same article, Mike Aum blames the decline of chivalry on corporate media and commercialism.
Oh, wow.
And they're arguing that men used to express their feelings through, heartfelt gestures like writing songs or poems, but now they rely on those store-bought gifts to show affection.
It's an interesting perspective. It suggests that, the mounting of chivalry has become commodified in a way. It's lost its authenticity. Maybe it's not about those grand gestures, but rather smaller, more personal acts of kindness that truly reflect the spirit of it.
I agree. And sometimes those smaller acts can have a huge impact. In that same article, Caravella Photo talks about how much she appreciates her partner's chivalrous acts.
Yeah.
Because it makes her feel safe and respected. And she specifically mentions feeling safer when her partner opens her car door for her, especially in today's world.
That's a really important point because it brings up that element of safety, which is particularly relevant for a lot of women. And while, chivalry shouldn't be about perpetuating that sense of vulnerability, those small acts of consideration, like making sure someone feels secure, can be really meaningful.
Right. It's about being mindful and considerate, regardless of gender. But as Glassbiter put it, it seems like chivalry is on life support, and a lot of people are trying to pull the plug.
It's true. There's definitely a tension between those who, are clinging to those traditional views and those who are advocating for a more modern egalitarian approach.
Exactly.
But let's not forget that for some, those traditional expressions of courtesy still hold value.
And
it can be a way of showing respect, honoring a certain social code.
like Lyricsing Ray, who says, chivalry reminds me of all that makes a man a gentleman and a gem.
Yeah.
It seems like they see it as a positive trait that reflects well on someone's character.
And it highlights the importance of intention. If those acts are coming from a genuine place of respect and kindness, they can be very meaningful.
Absolutely. And it's not just about men being chivalrous towards women either. Remember Cagsel from that Why Answers article, who said chivalry is not dead, not as long as I am alive.
I do.
It seems like they really embrace the idea of chivalry as like a personal choice, regardless of gender.
Absolutely. And that's where the conversation gets really interesting because it's not about just blindly following a set of rules, It's about being mindful, considerate, and respectful in our interactions with others, no matter who they are.
Right. And as our sources point out, sometimes that means having, open and honest conversations about what chivalry means to each of us, individually and in our relationships.
Yes, clear communication is key, and it can help us, navigate those potentially awkward moments and ensure that our actions are being perceived as intended. The Rebane article, Why Chivalry is Dead and What It Means for Romance, the author suggests that the decline of traditional chivalry has actually paved the way for deeper relationships.
Oh, that's a bold statement. How do they explain that?
Well, the article argues that without those rigid prescribed roles and expectations, we're forced to communicate, more openly and honestly about what we want and need from our partners.
Okay.
And this can lead to like a deeper understanding and connection, even if it means letting go of some of those romanticized notions of chivalry.
It makes sense, yeah. It's shifting the focus from performing those actions to actually understanding and meeting each other's needs.
Exactly. It becomes about recognizing each other's strength and supporting each other, as equals. And that, in a way, could be seen as a modern form of chivalry.
I like that perspective. Maybe true chivalry is less about those grand gestures and more about being present, attentive, and responsive to our partner's needs.
Yeah, I think you're onto something. And this idea of being present and attentive is actually echoed in a comment from the Distraction magazine article. The writer says, chivalry to me is not just romance, but how a guy genuinely cares for a girl and how he will do anything for her.
That comment really resonated with me too, and it suggests that it's more about those everyday acts of kindness and consideration rather than those sweeping gestures.
And it raises the question, should true chivalry even be gender specific? Couldn't those same qualities of care and consideration be expressed in any relationship, regardless of gender?
Absolutely. Maybe it's time to move beyond those rigid definitions and embrace a more inclusive understanding of what it means to be chivalrous.
And that evolution might already be happening. In the Berkeley Beacon article, the author observes that chivalry is not dead, it's been adopted by women.
Yeah. They're pointing out that women are increasingly taking on those traditionally chivalrous behaviors, from opening doors to paying for dates.
Exactly. It suggests that those roles and expectations are becoming more fluid, which could be a positive step towards greater equality.
Right. But as with any societal shift, there are bound to be challenges and differing opinions.
Of course.
Not everyone is going to be comfortable with those changing dynamics.
That's true, and that's where communication becomes even more crucial. Having open and honest conversations about our expectations and our values can help us, navigate those complexities and build those stronger, more fulfilling relationships.
And it's important to remember that chivalry, in any form, shouldn't be about manipulating or controlling someone.
Definitely not. It should always be rooted in genuine respect, and a desire to make someone feel valued and appreciated.
Yeah, sometimes the most chivalrous thing we can do is to simply listen to our partners and be responsive to their needs, even if it means challenging our own preconceived notions.
That's a great point. True chivalry is about empathy, understanding, and mutual respect.
It seems like the very definition of chivalry is undergoing a transformation.
It really is.
And as we move forward, it's going to be fascinating to see how these evolving notions of courtesy, respect, and kindness play out in our relationships and in society as a whole.
Absolutely.
As we've been, going through all these different perspectives on chivalry, I can't help but think back to that comment from Jake Fine in the Carol magazine article. He said that when he pictures chivalry, he still thinks of the classic knight in shining armor, that whole courting ritual.
Right.
It seems like that image is just so deeply ingrained in our culture.
It is.
Even though our understanding of what even constitutes chivalrous behavior is definitely changing.
It's true. It speaks to that enduring power of those romanticized notions. But as we've seen from our sources, the reality is much more complex.
Right.
And nuanced. There's that tension.
Yeah.
Between holding on to those ideals and recognizing that, well, they might not actually fit into our modern world.
And that tension is really apparent in some of those discussions we found online. Like, for example, on that Ask Men subreddit.
Yeah.
Some commenters were saying that, chivalry is dead because women killed it. essentially blaming, feminism for the decline of those traditional gender roles.
That's a perspective we hear a lot, but it's important to remember that feminism, at its core, is about equality.
Right.
It's not about, like, eradicating kindness or respect.
Exactly. And a lot of other commenters on that thread pushed back against that idea, pointing out that true chivalry isn't about expecting something in return.
Right.
It's about being considerate and respectful just because it's the right thing to do, regardless if you're a man or a woman.
I think that's a really key distinction because it kind of shifts the focus from that transactional view of chivalry, where it's like men doing things for women to get something in return,
Yeah.
to a more genuine and selfless approach that's based on, empathy and care.
It's about recognizing that everyone deserves to be treated with that respect and consideration. And, as I was reading through that thread, I was just struck by how many people were sharing personal anecdotes
Oh, yeah.
about both positive and negative experiences with chivalry. It seems like this is something that really resonates with people on a personal level,
It does, yeah.
even if we don't always agree on what it means.
It makes sense, though, right? These are the small but significant ways that we navigate our interactions with others, especially in the context of, like, dating and romantic relationships.
Absolutely.
It's no wonder people have, pretty strong feelings about it.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important to communicate our expectations and preferences really clearly. Because again, what might feel chivalrous to one person could feel completely outdated or even offensive to another.
Yeah.
And we can't just assume that everyone has the same understanding of what these gestures actually mean.
We can't. Open and honest communication can help us avoid those misunderstandings and build stronger, more respectful relationships. And this is a theme that, emerges throughout a lot of our sources.
Yeah.
And it's especially relevant now in a world where those traditional gender roles are becoming more fluid.
Right. It's about respecting those individual preferences and understanding there's no one-size-fits-all approach to chivalry. And, in the CBM blog article, the author talks about wanting his daughters to find partners who embody the true spirit of it.
Yeah.
Men who are, and I'm quoting here, reliable, committed, trustworthy, full of integrity, and considerate.
Right.
And these are qualities that go beyond just those, surface level gestures.
They do. They really do.
And actually speak to a person's character.
It highlights that true chivalry is about way more than just, opening doors or paying for dinner.
Exactly.
It's about those qualities that make someone a good partner and just a good person in general, regardless of their gender.
And those qualities are timeless. And I think that's why we still see this nostalgia for chivalry.
We do, yeah.
Even as they recognize that some of those traditional expressions of it might be, they might be outdated. For example, that Distraction magazine article referred to chivalrous men as, quote, an endangered species.
Right.
Kind of playing into this sense of longing for this bygone era.
But like we've discussed, those expectations were often rooted in a system that didn't necessarily benefit everyone.
Yeah.
And it's not about romanticizing the past. It's about taking the best aspects of those traditions, like kindness, respect, consideration, and then adapting them to fit into our modern world.
I agree. And honestly, that's why I think it's so exciting to see this evolution of chivalry with women taking on those traditionally male roles.
Yeah.
And men feeling empowered to express their care and consideration in new ways.
It's true.
It feels like a sign of progress.
It does.
It opens up so many possibilities for more balanced and fulfilling relationships.
It's about breaking free from those rigid, outdated scripts and creating new ways of, relating to each other that are based on mutual respect
Right.
and genuine connection.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we hope you've gained a better understanding of the complexities of chivalry,
Yeah.
its historical roots, and how it's being redefined in this modern world. And it's not about following a set of rules,
Right.
but rather about being mindful, respectful, and considerate in our interactions with others.
Absolutely. And as we move forward in a world where those traditional gender roles continue to evolve, the most chivalrous thing we can all do is to, communicate openly and honestly, treat each other with respect, and create a world where kindness and consideration are valued above all else.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the ever-evolving world of chivalry. We'll see you next time.